Hi, I'm Dr. Ransom. I teach saxophone lessons. Ferling 17. In this video, I'll cover all the basic elements of music: tone, notes, rhythm, articulation, dynamics, tempo, and breathing. I'll give examples of everything, including detailed explanations of all the trills and other ornaments. There's more to this etude than I could possibly cover here, so this is just the basics. In order to give you a more musical perspective, you'll need real-time feedback from a saxophone teacher. And if you don't already have one, I would be happy to sign you up for some private lessons online. Just send me an email to brian@briansaxophoneransom.com, and that email address is also in the description below. First things first, let's write in the measure numbers the way I have shown here. Now let's talk about the elements of music, starting from number 1, tone. If your tone is not good, nobody wants to hear it. One approach is to practice long tones with vibrato and with a tuner on every note at every dynamic level. Here's my worksheet. First, though, check your tuning note to make sure your mouthpiece is in the correct spot on the cork. After you've conquered that worksheet, you can begin applying it to Ferling lyrical etudes like number 17. Every time you come to a note that tends to be out of tune, like the very first note, middle D, for example, hold it for a few seconds with vibrato and at the dynamic level that's marked, and check to make sure that it's in tune. I call that the tuner game. If you want to get a perfect score on the tuner game, that's going to take some practice. There's more than one way to fix a middle D that's 35 cents sharp. You could press your low B key, but that might sound fuzzy or muddy. You could lip it down, but that makes it hard to focus the tone. These things take practice. Number 2, the notes. Of course, you have to play all the right notes, but first you have to play all the notes. That cadenza in measure 7 often gets rushed and messy. Practice it slowly. It'll help if you break it up into smaller groups. Practice each group several times until they're quick and clean. Then put them together. Also notice that E natural carries all the way through to the end of the cadenza. Use the same approach for trills. Trills are hard. You have to practice them back to back until they sound the same as each other, and then you can be consistent with them. Count the number of reps on these short trills. It's not random. Written out, they would look like this. For the one in measure 10, I recommend using side B flat. To trill side B flat to C, you don't need to lift the side B flat key, only the B key. Please don't use bis B flat to side C for this trill. The side C will sound very flat with the bis key being held down. The long trills in measures 5 and 16 should start slowly and accelerate through the grace notes. Here's a diagram of what I mean. See how the first few notes of the trill are very slow and then get faster towards the end. Trills on saxophone can be really ugly, so you need to dress them up a little bit. There's a turn in measure 6. You know, that sideways S looking thing. Well, I wrote it out and it looks like this. Number 3, rhythm. You could just guess at the rhythms, but you should really count them. You could listen to someone play the Etude a bunch of times and then just play along with them until you get a perfect match. And that's not a bad idea, but it's not as good as counting. Now, this one is hard to count because it's in 8/8 time. I know the time signature says common time, which means 4/4, but the tempo marking says to count eighth notes, and there's 8 of those in a measure, so 8/8 time. If you're counting eighth notes, then the eighth note gets the beat, which means a quarter note gets 2 beats and a half note gets 4 beats. Then there's 2 16th notes in one beat, or 4 32nd notes in a beat. And when you see sixtuplets like these in measures 11 and 18, it's easier to think of them as triplets with 1 triplet per beat. Now, the sixtuplet at the end of measure 3 all fits into 1 beat, so it's pretty fast, twice as fast as those other sixtuplets. The very first note in Etude 17 is a double dotted quarter note. So the quarter note is 2 counts, then the first dot represents an 8th note, which is 1 count, and the second dot represents a 16th note, which is another half a count. Altogether, that note is 3.5 counts long. The next note in the measure falls on the te of 4. Here's how you count Etude 17. If you print this picture, you can practice counting along with any performance of the Etude that you can find on YouTube or anywhere else. If you can't do it, you're going to be in trouble on audition day. Let's go back and look at that cadenza. It consists mainly of 2 phrases, each starting and ending with a fermata. I think the fermatas should be held pretty long, but not too much, about 4 counts each. Start each phrase slowly and then gradually speed up. Not too fast. Stay in control. Number 4, articulations. Tongue where it says. It's part of the challenge. If you tongue heavily, it will not sound good, but if you tongue too lightly, your audience may not hear it at all, in which case you didn't really tongue, and that can count against you, especially if your judge is someone like me. Yeah, I'm picky like that. When you see a bunch of notes that have a slur and staccatos, such as in measures 3 and 11, just tongue it legato. Number 5, dynamics. Okay, poco forte, I guess means a little forte, which is somehow not the same as mezzo forte. I don't know, I've never seen that before. I just start off kind of soft and crescendo through the phrase. But don't get too loud too soon. Save the really powerful stuff for big moments, like the cadenza and that fortissimo in measure 18. There are a lot of dynamics in this etude, and I have a few ideas that might be different than what you may have heard elsewhere. For example, the cadenza is marked forte. That's it. But that's kind of boring, so here's how I do it. Starting in measure 9, you'll see a lot of hairpins. I think sometimes when there are 2 of the same kind in a row, it means to do the same thing twice. Here's an example. Measure 9 starts out at piano and crescendos to something. It's not marked, so I just call it mezzo forte. Then in the next measure, it starts over at piano and crescendos to forte. So rather than 1 long crescendo, it's 2 separate crescendos. This happens again in measure 11, 2 decrescendos in a row, each one starting loud and ending soft. Measure 13 and 14 does the same thing. Notice the accents. I think an accent means you start loud and then get softer. I think the accents and the decrescendos are supporting each other to sort of emphasize the effect. I also think that saxophonists in general could pay more attention to the accents in lyrical etudes. Measure 15 should start piano. If you really look at the dynamics for the next 3 measures, you'll see there is a lot going on there. Dynamics that get overlooked by pretty much every performer out there. Everyone plays the high D in measure 17 really loud and then completely ignores the remainder of the crescendo and the accent over the A in measure 18. You see, the peak of this phrase is on the A, not the D. Measure 18 and half of 19 does not show any decrescendo, but I think it's a good idea to back off a little bit and not just play the whole thing loud. Starting in measure 20, you have hairpins that crescendo and decrescendo twice. And again, contrary to current performance practices, I think those should be brought out, especially putting emphasis on the E natural in measure 22. Number 6, tempo. I think this etude works great at 80 beats a minute. Any faster and it gets messy. Any slower and your audience falls asleep. Use a metronome so you can get used to the way it feels at 80. By the way, there's a ritardando in measure 18 that I think is misplaced. It seems like it should be in the following measure. Weird that it never shows an a tempo. How do you know when to resume speed? Or do you just play the rest really slow? That doesn't make sense. There's also a ritardando at the end of the cadenza that doesn't make any sense. And again, no a tempo. I don't know. Number 7, breathing. Ferling is pretty good about adding breath marks in appropriate places. Notice there's no breath mark after the first note in measure 7. That high C should go right into the cadenza without a break. In measure 14, I had to add a breath mark because the phrase is just too long for me. It's not a great spot, but it's the best I could come up with. Well, that's all I can think of right now without actually hearing you play it. Please let me know in the comments if there's something I left out or just got completely wrong. If you found this video helpful and or entertaining, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for future videos. Thanks for watching.